And let's get Twitch. Start there. Live chat. Let's double check it. I'm sorry if I sound a little rough. My kid is sick, which basically means I am sick. He's been sick a lot, which kind of expected. And we're just making sure everything's working. Uh-oh. Oh, it's muted. Are we working now? Yeah, okay. All right. Always double check everything. It's just who I am as a person. But not with everything. It's weird. But yeah, kid's sick. That means I'm sick. A little bit of a cold. It's nothing serious. Just some stuffiness and living on cough drops. It's pretty cool. Today we're going to dig into the old world. We're going to talk about the shooting phase article that Warhammer community has released. And we're going to look at the combat phase article that they have released. And really, I am eagerly awaiting the magic, because that was one of the sillier things that really held 8th edition back from my understanding. I, again, didn't play a lot of 8th, but even in 7th, magic could get a little silly. Now, before we dig in, I've got some announcements. There's a lot of things that I need to let everybody know. The first thing is that we are opening a web store. There's going to be a link in the description. There's not a ton of stuff in there right now. It will be a slow build up as we go. It'll carry GW products and it'll carry non-GW products. So that is something to look forward to. Is the web store will open. When the web store opens, I guess the web store is open. There's not a ton of stuff in there, but like I said, it will grow. In addition to that, I've reorganized the Patreon quite a bit. We've restructured the way it's going to work. By we, I mean me. And nothing really changed. I didn't really take anything away, but what I did do is all the patrons will just get access to all of the original games that I've been writing. Okay? So I will continue to do videos on those. Like that is I'm going to have at least one game 100% done. Worldwide shipping? That's a good question. Probably not right away, but I will probably work on trying to integrate it as we grow. Thanks, Dan. Thank you. Um, and you will see that the web store will have a little bit of some. It'll be competitive with other online retailers for the most part. I will offer, for patrons that are certain tiers of patrons. Okay. Thank you for that. Sorry, the Twitch chat just kind of caught me off guard. Sometimes it's hard to tell if people are bots or not, and that looks like a bot to me. So that being said, like I said, patrons will just get their own personalized discount code. It'll be personalized for a lot of reasons. Obviously, I need to be able to track if you're just handing it out all willy-nilly, and whether or not you're using it, stuff like that. Like it helps me. So they'll just get their own personalized discount code that'll give them 10% off of all purchases through the web store, and that'll be in addition to whatever the pricing is on the web store. There's certain things that it probably won't stack with, but we'll get into that later as I flesh that out, because that has not been finalized yet, but it is coming. So we got the web store, made that announcement, reorganized the Patreon. All patrons will have 100% access to every game that I write. The fantasy game is we are in playtesting stages. Obviously, I've been playtesting Halo. So both those are already in the folder. So if you're a patron, they're already in. You have already been sent the message of how to get them if you would like them. And honestly, like any kind of feedback is always helpful. So if you guys do decide you're going to download them and play them, all you got to do is just shoot me back and say, hey, man, like this isn't working. This is working. They're all effectively going to be in beta test for a bit. And, I am working to maintain them so that they are balanced and fun. And if you're on Twitch, there's an incoming ad break in a minute. Oh, man. Better take another sip of my here. Okay, so we've got that covered. We've got the Patreon talked about. We've got the. I will be announcing the giveaway winner this week. I apologize again. I've been a little sick, so I haven't done that. But that'll get announced by the end of the week. So by Saturday, because Sunday I'm doing a Thanksgiving dinner, and I'll probably announce it on Friday because I don't think I'm doing much on Friday. So I don't Black Friday shop. It's the worst. We'll give Twitch a minute to catch up on the ads before we dig into the old hammer stuff. We'll kind of chit chat for a minute. If you're on YouTube, about whatever you guys like. Oh gosh, don't mean to be so gross. Again, I'm sorry. God dang kids, they're like little petri dishes. Um, Old World Almanac. So we need to open up this one, and I never did the shooting one. And let's see. I think that's it. Let's actually take a look at this too, because that's a nice looking model. Let's do that while we let Twitch kind of catch up. Although this is, I don't know. So did you keep up with Worlds in Atlanta over the weekend? I caught a little bit. A little bit. I mostly just played with the kids. We did some Halo and we did some Minecraft and we played some games, which actually is another thing that I wanted to talk about. We could probably discuss that a little bit. Starting in December, if you are a patron or if you purchase through the web store or if you purchase anything on my Teespring, which is also getting reworked, if you look, there's links to all of that in the description. 1% of the net, not the gross, because so it's going to be after Teespring or after Patreon, after everybody else takes their cut, 1% of what's left every month for the next year is getting donated to Military Gaming Command. I just spoke with them about it last night. They are totally cool with it, which I didn't think it would be an issue. But before I just was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I always want to reach out and make sure like people are aware that I'm doing it. So it's again, it's about the transparency. It's all about the transparency. I don't want them to think that I'm like trying to use them for certain things. I want them to understand that I am going to let people know, but I want to make sure they know that I'm letting people know. So any purchases you make through Teespring, any Patreon support, and any web store purchases, 1% of that every month donated to Military Gaming Command. It's a really cool organization. They work a lot with veterans and service members who are injured and use gaming to kind of build a community and give people a sense of belonging. So it's one of those where it's very near and dear to my heart. And honestly, had I had that type of support when I was younger, I probably would be in a little bit better place. Maybe not now, but at the time, I probably would have been in a little bit better place. So if I can help support them and their mission, I will gladly do it. I wanted to make sure I also talked about that. Without further ado, let's talk about the old world. First, we're going to look at this. It's just a cool model. And I want to look at that handsome fella on his square base, the only base that matters. um, so this thing's super cool. I'm not a Tomb Kings fan. I don't like the aesthetic, but I can still appreciate that that is just a cool model, right? Uh, I'm curious to know what the actual size is. It looks like it could be roughly the same scale as the Terror Geists and the Zombie Dragons that you can get now. And it's going to be really interesting if it is the case, because if that is the case, that means that I'm probably going to be able to use my Tree Lord Ancients and just put them on square bases and then get converters so I could play them with both AOS and Old World. Because the Dryads were part of the Wood Elf army, and it'd be pretty neat if I could actually just kind of throw those back on square bases, get some converters, and just play however I wanted to with them. I am about it. Super cool. Really enjoy this model. Wanted to kind of touch on that just to show you guys some of the stuff that they're releasing for Old World. It is a new plastic kit, which means that some of these, yeah, like I said, I don't know. I look at this square base, and I'm guessing it's about Terrorgeist size. So let's pull that up real quick. Bear with me as we navigate this handsome website. Not the biggest fan. Boop. I think we're probably looking at somewhere roughly in that scale. Obviously the wingspan makes it look bigger than it actually is, and then the Bone Dragon, its wings aren't as spread out and it doesn't have the membranes. So it can really skew how big or look small it looks. Uh which one? The Bone Dragon? Yeah, I could agree with that, and I'm sure these little wings right here, I'm sure this right here breaks off instantly, which is why this is not the army for me. I've got these sausage fingers, and I have literally no grace. So, for those that have not met me in person, I am basically just built like a human brick. So, again, there's no gentleness, there's no grace. But I'm thinking it's probably roughly this scale. And if you haven't seen the model, let's see if we can find. Damn it. There we go. So, like, that's a vampire. So it's roughly just a human sized miniature on top. Gives you an idea of the scale. So if we come back over here and we look at that, like, I think, you got the Howdah, which makes it look taller, but I think we're looking about the same scale. And if that's the case, like I said, I'm hopeful that my Tree Lords will just port right in. And they're not going to be like, haha, if you want to play Old World, you have to use the old spoopy metal ones, because I won't. Sorry. So they released the shooting phase stuff first. One of my fellow YouTube content creators, gentleman by the name of Proxy Hammer, super nice guy. Enjoy my conversations with him. Has said, "Hey, I'm not super impressed with the shooting, and I get it, but it is exactly what I expected." Right? So let's dig in. We're now deep into our investigation of the rules of Warhammer the Old World, having learned how to strategize and move. This week we prime our muskets, draw our bowstrings, and crank the old arbalist handle to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune in the shooting phase. It's a lot of words to just say, let's talk about shooting. All right. As with the other phases, the shooting phase is broken into 4 steps, which you follow in turn for each unit. You declare your targets, you roll to hit, you roll to wound, you remove casualties. What does that sound like? Literally every game, right? Not even just every GW game. This is pretty much just every game. Everyone and everything shoots in this phase, whether they're lowly peasant bowmen or barbarian javelineers, a macabre Kemrian, screaming skull catapult, or a high elven mage manifesting a fiery convocation. Words are going to be a little hard for me, guys, and I apologize. So let's take a look at the longbow. It's got a 30-inch range, strength 3. It is armor bane 1, and volley fire. Without looking, because I did glance through this, but I don't remember anything at this point. If I remember right, armor bane just means it's AP -1. Like it just reduces your saving throw by 1, which I think is interesting because there's also AP. So if that's the case, it seems a little odd that you'd have AP and a special rule that does the same thing. Kind of curious to know why that's the case. And historically, volley fire just means you get to fire with 1 extra rank. We'll get to that, I'm sure. The Screaming Skull Catapult has bombardment, cumbersome, flaming attacks, magical attacks, move or shoot, multiple wounds, D3+1, and Screaming Skulls. This weapon shoots like a stone thrower using the bombardment special rule, a 3-inch blast template, and the stone thrower misfire table. The multiple wounds special rule applies only to a single model whose base lies underneath the central hole of the blast template. And again, that's a lot of words to just say the multiple wounds special rule only affects the model that's underneath the dead center of the template. That's it. So you're going to pick a unit, you'll declare its target. You can only shoot if you have a ranged weapon and you haven't marched and or charged, which makes sense. You know, if you charge or an engagement range, you can't use ranged weapons. This isn't Age of Sigmar. To shoot, a model must have line of sight to its target, and you cannot split fire. So again, very, very normal things for a lot of fantasy games. In some cases, not every member of a unit can let loose. Models can almost always shoot only once, no matter how many attacks they have in their profile, unless they have the volley fire special rule or are stationed on a hill. Only the front rank may fire. So yeah, volley fire just lets you fire with an extra rank. So if you're on a hill, you get to fire in 2 ranks. If you have volley fire, you get to fire in 2 ranks. I would bet that volley fire just says you get to fire with an additional rank, which would mean if you have 3 ranks on a hill, all 3 should get to fire. That would be my assumption. That makes sense. Once the target has been chosen, it's time to roll the hit. There's an old style ballistic skill or BS table. And it is kind of BS, right? Like it runs 1 to 10, and I'm mixed on this. I don't hate it. I don't love it. So if it's ballistic skill, if I remember right, it's 7 minus your ballistic skill to get the target number, which is what it looks like. Determine, blah, 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 blah. If it's ballistic skill 6 or higher, it gains a reroll should it fail to hit while shooting. The second roll usually has a lower chance of hitting. Okay, so let's talk about this. And again, I'm not opposed to it because I'm sure there's not a lot of auras of rerolls and things of that nature. But if you have ballistic skill 6, 7 minus 6 means you hit on 1s, right? What that means is you hit on 2s, but if you miss, you get to re-roll that die, and if the re-roll is a 6, then you hit. If you're ballistic skill 7, if you hit on 2s but you miss, you get to re-roll that miss, and then the 5 means you hit, etc., etc. So it's an interesting mechanic, and again, I don't hate it, especially because I know there's not a ton of shooting in Warhammer Fantasy. So it's not like you're going to be sitting through a Caradron Overlord or a Tau shooting phase or anything like that, where people are just like, I'm ballistic skill 10, I hit on 2s, re-rolling failed hits, and again, and then confirming on 2s, right? So it's not the end of the world. I just feel like there's nothing wrong with it, but it makes more sense to just give units a target number. You know, so like if you're ballistic skill 1, why can't you just say hits on 6s? Like, why do we have to have ballistic skill 1? And maybe I need the full, it's fairly similar to yes, it is, Dan, absolutely. And again, like I don't hate it, but we could have achieved the same goal by just giving individual weapons a hit roll, much like they did in 10th edition 40K. To me, that is one of the best things that came out of 10th edition, was giving specific weapons their own weapon skill and their own ballistic skill, because that allows for a lot of interesting interactions while still making the game a little bit simpler. Like, you almost add more depth while still making the game simpler, and that's an amazing thing to be able to do. And to me, that is one of the best things that came out of 10th. And I feel like it's a little bit of a missed opportunity here to just say, hey, peasant bowmans with their longbows have ballistic skill 6 plus or 5 plus, etc. But again, without the full context of the rules, maybe there's an actual reason for it. We will see when the book comes out. Of course, there are various negative modifiers to shooting. It's -1 to hit if you've moved, which again, we're talking about to the hit roll, not to your ballistic skill, according to what we're reading. And there's an important but minute difference there. -1 to hit if you're at long range. -1 to hit if you're receiving a charge, which is one of your charge reactions. So if something charges you, you just get to shoot, right? But you can usually only declare that once per unit. I'd have to go back to that one, that article, and reread it, but I'm pretty sure it's still the same thing. -1 to hit if the target has partial cover, and then on top of that, a natural one always misses. While negative modifiers can stack past 6, you may find yourself having to roll 7 plus, 8 plus, or 9 plus. A natural 6 followed by a roll of either 4, 5, or 6. Which again, I actually don't mind this at all. It's very, very throwbacky. It does add a little bit of interesting interaction to the game. Sixes don't always hit, and what it does is it allows you to create a broader band with a smaller die. There are games out there that use D6s, D8s, D10s, D12s, D20s, etc. And when you get into those D10 type games and bigger, the reason they have those broad ranges is because it gives you more wiggle room to make things work a specific way. If you're on a D10 scale game, you can have the average human, you could still put them at a 3, right? Like your toughness is 3. And what that does is that sets the tone for the game. Most things that you interact with, if they're infantry, are going to be on 3, right? Like toughness 3, strength 3. But then what that does is that gives you a much wider range to work with in order to make dragons feel like dragons, etc. So, and this is just a way of kind of artificially creating that same broader power band. That's all. There's more old school goodness in the next step, which is the wound step, blah, 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 blah. So again, I don't hate the wound chart. I don't love the wound chart. Let's go to strength 4 and toughness 4, right? Actually, let's go to 5. So what's interesting is it's a one step. It's 4s if you're equal, 3s if you're 1 less, 2s for everything else. 5s if you're 1 more. Again, just the toughness, however you want to. And then 6s for everything else. So if we go to 8, it's the same interaction. 8 versus 8 is 4s. 8 versus 7 is 3s. 8 versus 6 and lower is 2s. And again, like I said, I don't hate it. It's not hard to figure out. But at the same, and it does allow for like melee and shooting to interact in a different way. So it's one of those, like, it is what it is. We didn't necessarily need a chart, but I understand the intent here. It wouldn't be Warhammer without a saving throw, and the one thing I did notice. So this is strength 4, 5, 6, 8. So strength 4 -1 AP, strength 8 -3 AP. So I want to come back to that. Sorry, I had a random thought. I want to come back to that. There's some old school goodness in here, blah, 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 wound chart. Okay, it wouldn't be Warhammer without a saving throw, which your opponent will make during this first step, or this step. It's a familiar process. Compare the AP of the weapon with the armor value of the model it's hitting. Light armor grants a 6+ save, heavy armor a 5+, which can be boosted with a shield, a barded mount, and certain spells and magical items. There is a small difference, however, as models can also have a ward save. This cannot be modified by AP, and it is a separate save. So ward saves are kind of, if you've never played fantasy, ward saves are kind of like this weird hybrid feel no pain invulnerable save. Because most things in the game just do 1 damage, and I assume Old World is going to kind of interact in a similar way. Most things are just going to do 1 damage, so it's like it is an invulnerable save, but it is kind of a feel no pain as well. It's kind of weird. And then the final step is remove casualties and take panic tests where necessary. This is super simple. Remove 1 model for every wound caused. Unless the target has more than 1 wound, you know the drill. You'll need to take a panic. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. We already know this. Cool. But this is the most important article. Because the two things that really kind of suck about Old Hammer, the magic, which we just discussed, and the leadership, right? There's a few interactions in that leadership that are really rough. There are plenty of weird and wonderful shooting units in Warhammer. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is. All right. There are 2 categories of spells that can be fired off in the shooting phase: magic missiles and magical vortexes. Human wizards using battle magic can, for instance, blast off a quick fireball, while those blessed by the dark gods may use the lore of demonology to conjure a vortex of chaos. All right, so magic missile has a casting value of 8, a range of 24, and the target enemy unit suffers 2d6 strength 4 hits, each with an AP of 0. But it does have the flaming attacks. So here's what's interesting. Here's what we can extrapolate from that. That's a fancy word, and I like using it. Again, we've talked about, and I'm just doing that so you can see where my cursor's at. The casting values look like they stayed the same. So I think by and large, magic is going to stay the same. I think it's just going to be, hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate that, 1984 Basti. If you've got a name you'd rather I call you by, that's fine, but thanks a lot. The enemy unit suffers 2d6 strength 4 hits, each with an AP of 0. This spell has the flaming attacks rule. So casting value of 8 plus tells me that magic is probably going to be very similar. We're probably still looking at rolling 2d6 or some kind of interaction where you're rolling multiple dice to hit that casting value. I still think there's probably going to be some sort of deny attempt that's going to be allowed or involved. You know, again, in fantasy, you had the big pools of dice. And I'm almost wondering if it's just going to be like a flat 2d6 with a bonus equal to your wizard level. And then maybe like some sort of ability where you can add a die here and there rather than just like amassing massive pools of dice. I didn't play a ton of 8th, but 8th was like you'd roll 2 dice. That's how many dice you'd get for your pool. Your opponent got the largest of the 2 die rolls. So if you rolled a 3 and a 4, you'd get 7 dice. Your opponent would get 4 for dispelling. And then you just have this pool of 7 dice you could assign to different wizards and cast spells. However, in older editions of the game, you got a set number of dice, and I forget what it is. Let's call it 4. And then each wizard would kick in dice equal to, I think it was their casting level. And then you could just spread those out however you wanted to. But they were limited in how many they could use every time they casted a spell based off their wizard level. So, just an interesting thing. I think, like I said, we're looking at something that's going to be more along the lines of like a 40K or Horus Heresy. Not 10th edition, more like an older 8th, 9th edition 40K, a Sigmar, a Horus Heresy interaction, where it's going to be you probably just get 2 dice, and then there's probably some sort of bonus equal to your caster level. And then I would be willing to bet that there's going to be some sort of interaction where you can attempt to dispel. And I would almost bet that because the spells are spread out between the phases, in an effort to keep the game fairly easy, Wizards are probably going to be very limited on how many spells they know. And it's probably going to be like a signature spell and then one per level. And then you just get to cast like one of them or like one spell per level. And it could just be you get to cast them all because of the different phase interaction. Vortex of 2d6 strength 4 hits. Another thing I want to talk about that. Okay, so strength 4 hits with an AP of 0. The fact that weapons have AP tells me that strength probably doesn't modify saves anymore. So again, if you've played Old Fantasy, you know that strength 3 attacks didn't modify saves, and AP wasn't even a thing. Strength 4 was -1, 5 was -2, 6 was -3, etc., etc., etc. Which is why I told people when 8th edition 40k came out, like it just interacts a lot more like fantasy than it does 40k because of that like hit, wound, save interaction that 8th and 9th had. So the fact that they've taken the AP and just created it as a weapon stat, I don't think it's bad. I think it depends on how it's implemented because a lot of your heroes might fight at strength 4. And so if you're fighting at strength 4, you traditionally had AP 1, right? Because 3 to 4 means 0 AP to -1. And I think it was rending. But anyway, what that does, and that's why you had the piercing or rending special ability, whatever it was, because there was no AP stat. So like if I was strength 4, I was just reducing your save by 1 all the time, and then if I had rending, I would reduce it by another 1. So it's one of those where rending or uh, whatever it was called up there makes more sense without the AP stat. But again, we also don't have the full context of the rules, so maybe there's something that I'm missing. Flaming attacks. Generally, if I remember right, they ignore certain things like trolls, for example, didn't used to be able to take their regen attacks or regen rolls against flaming attacks. Dryads didn't get their ward saves against flaming attacks. So, flaming attacks will have different interactions and rules inside the game, and it's a pretty cool thing. And I do appreciate that spells are just hits and wounds. And again, if you've watched any of my content, you know how I feel about mortal wounds. I don't like them. I don't think it's a good mechanic. Um, they have their place in certain games, but by and large, it it's not a fun mechanic in my opinion. If I just get to look at you and be like, "Ha, I roll dice, you pick up models," that's inherently more powerful than saying, "Ha, I roll dice, you roll dice, and then based off of those two interactions, you pick up models." If I can skip part of that process, it's just going to be stronger. So that's always been one of the things that I just appreciate more about older Warhammer games is there aren't mortal wounds. Things just do hits. Vortex of Chaos remains in play. Place a small 3-inch blast template. So this is kind of like your endless spells. Central hole is within 15 inches of the caster. While in play, the template is treated as dangerous terrain. It moves d6 inches in a random direction. Hell yeah. Uh, any unit, friend or foe, the moving template touches or moves over suffers d6 plus 1 strength 3 hits with no AP. So again, we're just looking at basically like a little tornado that bounces around in random directions. And then if it hits something, you just take d6 plus 1 strength 3 hits. So again, if you've not played older Warhammer games, all that really is going to mean is that it auto hits, but you still have to roll the wound, and then you'll still get a save. Again, rarely does Magic just say pick up your models unless you're an elf. Usually, if you're an elf, you have some sort of interaction like that. So that's what we have for shooting. That's interesting because it says next up. Oh, after combat phase. Reading's hard. So that's what they have for shooting. And again, it's exactly what I expected it to be. I'm excited. What my buddy over at Proxy Hammer was not super thrilled about was he just felt like shooting doesn't look very good. Um, if we look at the longbow, it's Armor Bane 1, which again I assume, let's see if that's in here. Let's see if I skipped over it. It is not in here. Okay. I assume that's going to be like the old rending, or it could just be like hit rolls or wound rolls of 6 increase your AP, you know, but it's going to have some sort of armor penetration interaction. You're going to get one shot, and I think a lot of your stuff is going to be probably ballistic skill. You're probably going to be hitting on 4s and 5s with a lot of the game. Like, I think hitting on 3s with ranged attacks is going to be pretty rare. And even if you do hit on 3s, actually hitting on 3s is going to be rare. Uh, I think basically, if you're in long range, you're -1 to hit, which means if you have like an 18-inch range gun, anything that's over 9 inches away, -1 to hit. So now you're hitting on 4s. If you moved, -1 to hit. Now you're hitting on 5s. So again, it's one of those where, yes, he's right. Shooting is probably not going to be very good in this game compared to, say, 40K. But there's a reason for that, right? It's because the game is balanced around melee. That was always the difference between fantasy and 40K. 40K was always balanced around shooting. Fantasy was always balanced around melee. And if you look at 40K over the last 2-3 editions, outside of a few, very, very few handfuls of times, the most dominant armies tend to be the ones that are mobile and shooty. Occasionally you'll get a melee army that can dominate, but that's just because of good matchups or like the terrain layout's very beneficial for whatever the build is. But if you look at like most of the dominant stuff, it's been shooting builds. Sorry, I didn't warn you. There's an ad on Twitch. Before we jump into that, let's see. Let's go over here. We won't pull it up yet. We'll give Twitch a minute to catch up. Goodness. Send a thanks to Basti again. One of those where hopefully they heard me when I shouted them out, but send a little thanks in the chat box. And I need to get better. I need to work on how to get Twitch and YouTube working together a little bit better. Let's see, what else do we have that we can look at? Well, we're giving them, it's about another 40 seconds, so it won't be long. Morale and psychology, that's the one I'm curious about. When was the fight phase? Was that this week? That was yesterday. So morale and psychology should be out next week. Old World Almanac, we can close that out. That's a handsome dragon. That is a handsome dragon. Do we have? I bet there's nothing here yet. Let's pull it up real quick. That's what I figured. All right. What is this? All right. Welcome back from the ad. Oh, it's an old world card game. I see, card game. Jesus. All right, so now we're going to take a look at the fight phase. We gave everybody on Twitch the minute or two to kind of catch up. Just kind of looked at a few other things. Now that you guys are back from ads, I don't get to see YouTube ads, so I'm sorry I can't warn you guys out there or ladies. So far, the run up to Warhammer the Old World, we've prepared for battle in the strategy phase, jockeyed for position in the movement phase, and darkened the skies with arrows in the shooting phase. It's now time to get to the grimmest business of all, slinging swords and shouldering pikes in the combat phase. I feel like there's a better verb we could have used here. Like swinging even would have been better than slinging. I'm not throwing my sword. Gee, like and I'm nitpicking, I know, but it's one of those like, man, For as much as I enjoy Games Workshop and as much as I enjoy a lot of their games, sometimes their writers just boil my blood, and I shouldn't let it get to me. You may not be surprised by this point to discover that the fourth and final phase of the game round is divided into 4 simple steps: choose and fight, calculate result, break test, pursuit. This right here is going to probably make or break the popularity of this game. We'll see. As with the shooting phase, these steps are followed in order for each separate combat. It's too complicated to summarize in full here, but it should give you an idea of how the flavor works. You begin the phase by choosing which combat you want to begin first. In general, fighting happens in ranks. Only the first rank of an engaged unit can fight. However, a unit with a wider fighting rank than its opponent can still attack with every model in that rank. Hey, buddy, question. The doubles event, two 1K lists. Two 1K lists. I'm pretty sure it was in the BCP description, but I will double check it just to make sure. But it is two 1,000 point lists for a total of 2,000 points per team, Dan. However, a unit with a wider fighting rank than its opponent can still attack with every model in the rank your troops surround. Okay, so I don't hate this right here, because this right here makes sense. Like, yes, we are in formations, but it was always kind of weird when do I have right? So like if I've got a formation like this, right? And I charge like this, it was always kind of weird that just these middle dudes could fight. So I don't hate this because it is a good way of A, speeding up combat to allow more models to fight, and B, like, kind of simulating what would actually happen without having to move a bunch of models, right? Because what would happen is if you have a wider formation, when they slam into that smaller formation, they're going to encircle them. They're not going to just stop and go, ha ha. So I like this. I think this is a good change. There are plenty of wrinkles to this. You can make supporting ranks from a deeper rank. Multiple units can be engaged in the same combat, and any model that is able to fight without being in base contact may only make one attack this turn. So again, this pretty standard. Didn't really change much, and a lot of models have one attack, so it's one of those. But in the rare occasion that you get more than one, just know. Once you've determined who can fight, you determine initiative order for each model and see who strikes first. The model with the highest initiative strikes first, and so on down the order, with a bonus for charging and a bigger one for hitting them in the flank or rear. There could still be a situation, however, in which a lumbering foe like a stone troll may find itself striking second on the charge against the preternatural senses of a swordmaster of Hoth. So this makes sense. And again, kind of a throwback to like A, old fantasy, and even B, old 40K. Because if I remember right, charging didn't give you an initiative bonus in fantasy, but I could be wrong there. If you remember, let me know in the comments or in chat, and just let me know. But I want to say fantasy didn't have that bonus initiative for charging. There could still be a blah 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 blah. Also, it's interesting. The Swordmaster of Hoth is initiative 6 and not always fights first. I wonder if that's going to stay initiative 6 or if it's going to be initiative 6 with always fights first. Historically, if you don't know, most of the elf stuff had a special rule called always fights first, and what it did was literally what it sounded like: you always fight first. And this superseded any other rules. So what that means is you could have dudes that have great swords or great weapons, like the Swordmasters of Hoth, and their great weapons had a rule that said they had to fight last, but the always fight first rule superseded that. So you could charge with your great swords, and you would get to strike before your opponent gets to, and just be like, haha. So it's one of those where curious to see if that interaction stays, or if they just give great weapons a lower initiative as opposed to just making them always strike last. Weapon skill and striking to hit. So this is again, it's an interesting table. So let's go to 4. So when you're at 4, you hit on 4s until you're fighting against somebody with a weapon skill that's more than double yours. So double is still 4s, but more than double is 5s. And then you hit on 3s immediately, but where do 2s start? Is it just a 3-step? What are we doing here? So let's go to 6s. So 5 is 3s, 4 is 3s, 3 is 3. So it's more than double the other way, gets you to 2s. So what that means is you're never hitting on 6s, which is interesting. And I'm sure it's to make it harder to modify people out of being able to swing in melee. Harder to basically make it so you just like, I'm never hitting you in melee. Because again, the game was always balanced around melee, so they don't want anything that's going to force you to hit on 6s in melee, because then it's going to, if you have a -1 to hit penalty, make it even harder. They want melee to be where the game gets expedited and where the game gets played rather than shooting. You roll as many dice as your engaged models have attacks, and the higher initiative model striking first. Blah, 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 blah. Next, you roll the wound, make armor saves as normal. Yep, so we know how that works. Interesting, that means the wound table for melee is probably the same as the wound table for shooting. It doesn't say it is, but I want to say the shooting table specifically said ranged attack wound table. We're going to check that out in a little bit here. Combats in Warhammer the Old World are usually decisive. One side or the other makes the breakthrough and the loser is pushed back or breaks. Unlike in other Warhammer games, you don't flee based on your leadership alone. You have to calculate the combat result. In other words, you work out who's won by totting up. Okay, I hope that's supposed to say totaling. Who's killed who. So again, combat result score. To determine your combat result score, consult the table below. Unsaved wounds inflicted. So this is no longer models destroyed. This is wounds inflicted. Actually, it probably was always wounds inflicted. Rank bonus, battle standard, standard, flank attack, rear attack, high ground, overkill, +1 point per excess wound as applicable. I don't remember what overkill is, but that's been in older editions also. But really, here's what it boils down to is if I charge you or we fight, doesn't matter who charged you. When we're done making our attacks, both sides, you total up how many wounds I did to you. That's unsaved. We total up how many wounds you did to me. And we keep a tally. Then we total up our rank bonus. And that's beyond the first. So if you have 4 ranks of 5, and it has to be ranks of 5, again, assuming that we're still using all the old Warhammer rules, 5 or more, I should say, then what we're doing is if I have 4, I get a +3 rank bonus. And then if I remember right, there's a cap on how big your rank bonus can be. So if I get 3 there and you get 2 there. So if I did 3 wounds and you did 3 wounds, and I have a 3 rank bonus and you have a 2 rank bonus, it's now 6 to 5. If I have a standard, that's +1. If you have a standard, that's +1. If I have a battle standard and you have a battle standard, and I think the battle standard and the standard, if I remember right, is basically like one of them is the unit standard and one of them is your army standard. Now, if you have a unit that is attacking, trying to think of the best way to word this. If you are attacking an enemy's flank, which is just their side, so again, if we pull my phone up here real quick, right? If this is the front of my unit, if I'm on the side, I get to add 1 for having a flank attack. And then if I'm in your booty hole, I get to add 2 for getting your booty hole. And if I have both, I add 3. And then if you're on high ground, which just means like a hill, right? If you're fighting down a hill and somebody's fighting up a hill, the person who's fighting down the hill gets a bonus. And again, I don't remember what overkill is, but I feel like it's not super important. You add it all up to see who's won. If it's a draw, combat continues to the next turn, but if there's a clear loser, they must make a break test. This is a leadership test modified by how much you lost the combat by, with several outcomes. Interesting. This is a change. If the natural roll, is higher than the leadership stat of the testing unit's leader, which is just basically the highest leadership in the unit is what it's going to be most of the time. Then the unit breaks and flees. If the modified roll is higher, but the natural roll is lower, the unit falls back in good order. And then if the modified roll is lower than the leadership, or if you roll a double 1, the unit gives ground. Interesting. I can guess what a lot of this means, but let's just scroll down. Our sword masters, leadership 8, have come off worse in their combat against the stone trolls despite striking first and have lost by 3 points. They now take a break test with 3 possible outcomes. So they have a leadership of 8. If the modified roll is higher than their leadership, because you're adding 3, right? Because they lost by 3 points. You're adding 3. So 6 plus 3 is 9. So 6, 7, or 8, you fall back in good order. 9 or higher, you break and flee. Anything less, you give ground. Of course, we're not gonna tell people what any of that means. So maybe we will scroll back up and take some guesses at it. Run them down. When you win a combat, you have a range of choices depending on how the enemy reacts. If you pass a leadership test, you can reform for free, so that didn't change. A unit that gave ground, re-entering combat a few inches forward. Followed by, okay. Yep. And then pursue. If you catch the unit falling back, combat begins again. If a unit flees or falls back, if you catch a fleeing unit, it's cut down and destroyed. If you catch a unit falling back, combat begins again, and the pursuer counts as having charged. Okay. I'm curious to know if that resolves immediately, which would make sense if they count as having charged. So before we jump into ham hands here, and we'll come back to overrun and hammerhand. Okay, so here's what I think this means. Let's talk about this. Give ground. I think you just let's see. Do we have an option here? Follow up. Fall back in good order. A unit that flees or falls back, if you catch a... Okay. So, give ground, what I'm guessing give ground is basically like you take a 3-inch move, effectively. Some sort of small, minor movement away from your opponent. Okay? Now, fall back in good order, I assume... So, what I think that probably is that's probably like a D6 movement instead of the 2D6 break and flee. And that would make sense. Or like some sort of move plus a die, maybe, something along those lines. But you're not actually fleeing, right? You are falling back in good order. And then fleeing is fleeing, right? So then when you do that, you can restrain. Like if your opponent does one of those things, you can restrain, which means you take a leadership check. And then if you make it, you can just sit there and do a free reform. That's always been an option, so that's interesting. If it gave up ground, which is what I think is going to be like a maybe a D3-inch move or like a 3-inch kind of fallback move, you can follow up, which means you just re-enter combat, but that's all you do. You just smash together. So it's almost like the battle lines just shift. So you could like push opponents back, which I really like. That's a really interesting way to do it because now you could you could really almost benefit more from not killing units and pushing them back and having your opponent's own units move blocking their own units because you're just wedging them back and back and back. So I really like the implication of how that could work. Pursue, you pursue if the opponent flees or falls back, and I think we're looking at two variations of basically the same thing. I think the flee is going to be a larger movement, and I think the fallback is going to be a smaller unit movement. And then if you catch a fleeing unit, it's dead. It's the same interaction that happens in fantasy now. I got to run, I roll a die, you roll a die. If your roll is bigger than mine, I just pick up my whole unit. And it's kind of a shitty, yeah, the the ogre tactic, right on. Yeah, and the Lord of the Rings game uses a very similar kind of mechanic, which is interesting. You don't necessarily kill models as much in Lord of the Rings as much as you kind of push and position and bully units. So I like it. I think it's really interesting, and I think there's a lot of play there. Now, if you catch a unit falling back, you basically begin combat again, and the pursuer counts as having charged. So again, what that tells me is that you do it immediately. Like, based on what I'm reading, if you fall back and I catch you, we go by initiative. If you count as having charged, and we resolve combat from the beginning with that unit again. Which is, again, very interesting, and I'm not opposed to it. I actually kind of like that interaction. That could get a little rough, especially if you fail that leadership test to restrain, and now you have to pursue, and then you get stuck pursuing a unit that you don't want to mess with. You know, again, if we look at these sword masters, those guys are actually pretty good. At least they have been historically. So yeah, those trolls might have won, but then when they have to pursue, those sword masters might end up doing a lot more damage than they did before. Simply, maybe they had bad dice or whatever. And even then, even if they only like did enough damage to kill one troll, they might be able to do enough damage to kill another troll. And then you're looking at just a crippled unit. So again, I really think there's a lot of play here. I think there's a lot of interesting interaction. Not super thrilled about the overrun, but I didn't think it would necessarily not overrun the automatically cutting down and destroying units when they flee. But the fact that it's going to happen less often is going to help mitigate those feel bads. Because again, like I've been teaching my brother how to play fantasy, like 8th edition, as we prep for Old World. And man, one of the first things that immediately for him was just like, this sucks, was that interaction where I did more damage to him with my men at arms. I just got like real spicy dice, and my men at arms did more damage to his Charybdis than his Charybdis did to my men at arms. And then I just killed him. And he was just like, yeah, all right, that's cool, I guess. So, interesting. So overrun, in the case that the victor has completely killed its target, it may make a full move directly forward, and if you end up in another combat, that counts as a fresh charge. Oh, brutal. And again, the two armies that I'm probably looking to play, like I know I have a lot right now. I've got some night goblins that I picked up in a trade, and they're going to be my like learn how to play army while I build the armies that I want. But what I'm really looking to play are going to be rebuilding my Wood Elf army and my Bretonnian army. And man, looking at Overrun and understanding, like knowing how to use your cavalry with a cavalry army can really, really set the tone for the game. Like it could get brutal. There's plenty more to the combat phase. Wizards can use an assailment spells, for instance, while units fighting from behind a barricade or wall benefit from the extra protection. Assailment, casting value is 7. Ham hands, that's just so everybody knows, ham hands is just my term for hammer hand because that's a Grey Knight spell as well. And we don't ever call anything by what it's supposed to be called. So it's just going to be ham hands. Sorry for it. A single enemy, the unit the caster is engaged in combat with suffers 2d3 strength 4 hits with an AP of 2. So here you go. Here's your AP on the magic in engagement range. Am not surprised. I'm curious to know if you do this instead of fighting or if you do this in addition to fighting with that wizard. And then Soul Eater, a single enemy model the caster is engaged in combat with suffers a single strength 3 hit with multiple wounds 3, special rule with no armor saves permitted. Ward and regen can be attempted as well. So again, here's our mortal wounds, right? Like I just got done talking about how they weren't as prevalent, but here we go. But that's not terrible because you still have to wound, right? So you roll 1 wound die and they don't splash. So one model takes 3 damage. So you'll roll 3 ward saves for the one model, it'll die if you don't make them, or it'll take damage if it's a multi-wound model. And it's you still have to roll the wound. So if I cast it on a duder, right? I'm just trying to think of what it just a peasant, whatever, some infantryman, like a regular infantry unit. It's probably dying. Like one model is probably dying. But what's important is that like damage doesn't splash because most things are just 1 damage, right? And you still have to roll that wound roll. So if you're hitting something that's toughness 3, you still have to roll a 4 up before you can even apply the wounds. And again, to me, that therein lies the biggest difference when you start comparing a lot of the older fantasy mortal wound interactions to the more modern mortal wound interactions. That's it for this week's rule snapshot from Warhammer the Old World. Next week's installment is all about morale and psychology, fear, terror, hatred, and all that good stuff. So I think they're going to pull from 8th edition for fear and terror because those were fairly simple interactions that were still fairly effective. If you look at the older editions of the game, Cause Fear and Cause Terror got oppressive when it was army wide because it used to just be in the older editions, oh, you're within 12, make a leadership check. Oh, did you fail that leadership check? Are you within 6 inches of another unit? They make a leadership check. Oh, they failed. Are they within 6 inches? And it could create this massive cascading effect in which your whole army was just running away after one bad leadership roll. And what they did in 8th edition was basically, I don't remember the exact rule, but effectively it was if you targeted the unit with attacks, you reduced your ballistic skill or weapon skill to 1 if you failed that leadership check. And I could be wrong on that. I don't know 8th edition the way I know 5th, 6th, 7th because that's where I lived with fantasy. So, uh, all in all, I think everything looks really cool. I'm really happy with it. It's exactly what I expected it to be. A slightly modernized version of Old Hammer. There's maybe some things I'd like to see a little bit more of, but for the most part, right, I think everything looks pretty solid. I'd like to see maybe a little bit more of an interactive feel to the game, but I know that's not what they're going for. You know, it's like when they released Horus Heresy, we were re-releasing Old Hammer for people. We weren't making a whole new game, we were re-releasing an old game. So I get it. I get why we don't have a more modern approach. So before I wrap this up, does anybody have any questions, any comments, or anything that they'd like to see or discuss before we get off of here? Just let me know if you're on the chat. And then while you're typing out your answers, reminder, by the end of the week, we will have the terrain box giveaway finished. And that is going to be, I will ship that out after the first of the year. Mostly, I need to get through Christmas and the holidays. Like, I would love to tell you I will ship it out immediately, but man, when you're doing holiday stuff and you've got kids and you've got a family, if as many of you probably know, your mind isn't always where it needs to be. So it's one of those where just a heads up, I will do my best to get that shipped out, but we are going to plan on shipping it after the new year. And the other reason too is that if I ship it before the new year, there's a good chance you don't get it till afterward anyway because of the spike in shipping that happens the last month or two of the year. So, do you expect a reveal of Chaos Dwarves? That is a great question, and actually, let's take a look and I will be able to tell you. Uh, I don't know if I'll tell you, let me rephrase. I don't know that I will be able to tell you exactly, boop, but I will at least be able to tell you. I have this right here. I've kind of collated all the old world stuff. So, as of right now, GAW has confirmed the following: Empire of Man, Orc and Goblin tribes, Mountain Holds. So, Chaos Dwarves, I don't expect a reveal, and here's why. If you look, bonus factions that won't be part of the narrative but will have rules, Chaos Dwarfs. So in the first wave or the first edition, however they break this game down, no. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think Bretonia, where are you at? Shout out to my Bretonian players. Whoop whoop. Bretonia, right here. I think they are going to get new models and reveals, which they've already had. Bruh, I'm telling you, I can't wait to have some real nice looking maidens riding horses casting spells. Looking forward to it. I think Tomb Kings are going to get reveals, right? Which we've seen. And then I wouldn't be surprised if you see maybe like one or two reveals for some of these other units or models or armies, I should say. Again, like I'm mostly curious about the Wood Elves because I am a big fan. That was my honestly that was my primary army in fantasy, Wood Elves. And then Bretonia was like the one I was kind of building and screwing around with and playing. But Wood Elves was like my number one. I don't think they get much, right? And there's going to be an ad break in a minute and a half on Twitch, but I don't think even Wood Elf gets much. But for the first wave, I don't think any of this stuff down here, Dark Elves, Skaven, Vampire Counts, Demons, Ogres, Lizardmen, or Chaos Dwarves, I don't think they get anything. And there's one faction, oddly enough, that isn't listed here, and that's the Kislev. And Kislev had like a lot of concept art that was released. So if there is a sleeper, like sneak it in faction that they're going to do, I think it's going to be that one. I don't think it's going to be Chaos Dwarves. I think we're looking at Kislev as like the sleeper sneak in faction if they do that. I also don't know if we're going to have a starter box in the vein of like a two faction rule book starter box like we get for 40K and Sigmar. But if we do, which GW I think has already said no, we're not doing that. But what they might do is release a not starter box, which just means it'll be limited edition. So like if you remember, the Indom box wasn't technically a starter box because it's limited edition. So we might see some sort of limited edition box that does Bretonia and Tomb Kings, and those are the two armies I think it'll be in if they do that because of the newest ad time. I'll drop this link into chat. I've just kind of compiled everything I could. We'll put it in YouTube chat too. We've got a few people on YouTube. Okay, it's cool. You could do it that way. Interesting. If you're still watching on YouTube, there we go. I apologize. Evidently, Yeah, no, I get that, Jimmy. I don't disagree. And I don't know if you can hear me because you're on ad. Disagree. But I do think some of the AOS stuff is going to go both ways. I think Dryads end up in both games, as do possibly Treemen. All right. Yeah, evidently, YouTube chat wasn't working. I didn't realize. I apologize. And it's still being whack. Let's shrink you down. And I think it's this. I think it's this. Can we? Yeah, there we go. Well, that's not what I wanted. Oh, yeah, it is. Sorry, I'm just reorganizing some stuff. Uh, well, that was weird. I just heard. You think Lizardmen will be the new AOS sculpts? Do I think Lizardmen will be the new AOS sculpts? I do not. Again, I don't know if ad time's over, but I do not. There we go. I don't think so. I think anything that's like released after AOS has come out is going to stay AOS only. Maybe the Lizardmen. The main thing with that is going to be like the newer AOS sculpts are going to be kind of big. And I know they've said they're increasing base size, but I don't know how big the new Source sculpts are. I know how big the old ones are, but I don't know how big the new ones are. But they've said that new, maybe not models, maybe it's War Scrolls. New War Scrolls are going to stay AOS. So again, if you wanted to, like, if Lizardmen come out and you wanted to run the new Sauruses, if they're on the right size base, I don't think anybody's going to tell you no. And that's the main thing. So there we go. I had to fix some stuff. I am hearing voices, which is odd. Maybe it's the crazy finally coming. Oh my gosh. All right. So that's where we're going to wrap it up for today. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for talking about the new old world stuff. I appreciate it. For those that don't know, we will be running a doubles tournament in December. I've already posted a link for BCP on that from the Facebook page. And then in addition to that, I will start working on next year's schedule of events. So look forward to that. We will be running some old world. Hey, man, again, appreciate that a lot. It means a lot. You have a great night in Germany. If man, that's awesome. I love that we are talking to people across the ocean. That is so amazing. I couldn't imagine being alive in a different era, right? Like, how cool is that? But again, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Everybody, have a great one. Schedule of events will start coming up for the next 6 months within the next in December. So we'll get January to June in December. So have a good one and happy Thanksgiving.